Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustvedt, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Hello there, and welcome to the show. Just before we get going, I've got a favour to ask. The show ultimately lives and dies by the ratings and reviews given to it by you, the listener. So if you could spare, 10-15 seconds to give this a quick rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, I would be massively grateful. Anyway, let's crack on. NYX is a collective of experimental vocalists and electronic artists based in London. In Greek mythology, NYX is the primordial goddess of the night, born from chaos, giving birth to light and day. And it's this duality which inspires their creativity. NYX blend traditional vocal techniques with cutting-edge sound design, and in doing so, they craft sonic worlds that bridge the ancient and the futuristic. Their 2020 collaborative album, Deep England, with Gazelle Twin, was named one of The Guardian's top 10 contemporary albums, and NYX received Film London's Breakthrough Talent Award in 2021. They have just completed their debut TV score for the BBC's Dope Girls, due out in February 2025, and are due to release their debut album, NYX, in March 2025. I'm joined by Sian O'Gorman. Sian, thanks for joining me.
Hello, thank you. What a beautiful introduction.
So, yeah, it's good, isn't it? It didn't sound too much like an obituary.
No, I thought it was very positive and magical sounding.
Yeah, wonderful. So I would like to start, as I always do, if we are to cast our minds back to when you were growing up on the mean streets of Auckland, if someone had asked you what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied?
Oh, man. Do you know what is totally crazy is I used to walk to school. And imagine the day that I would be making music for films. So I'm living my dream. I think somewhere between that and probably like when I was younger, maybe like a pop star or a ballerina or something really dramatic and outrageous and everyone look at me kind of way. But I think I was always walking and making up songs and tunes, and I loved movie music so much that I spent a lot of my time listening to movie soundtracks. I grew up a little Disney kid, so I was very much like in that world. That's what I listened to all the time. So I think imagining like creating really beautiful musical worlds and not only kind of writing the music but also performing it was always a dream. So yeah.
What were the standout Disney films that you can remember?
I mean, the first one that probably hit real hard was we had The Lion King. I think that was our first like family movie that we all really enjoyed, and so we had that in the car. We would play that all the time. I loved that. I loved The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, all of these amazing kind of epic theatrical pieces of cinema. Like I loved them. So those were my first pieces of cinematic wonderment that really hit me. And then later on, it was all like the Gladiator and the Lisa Gerrard kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it all started with Disney and walking to school and thinking. It was never like I want to be a Disney princess, but it was like I want to make the music and I want to sing the songs in the background.
And what was there something that came before that? What was your kind of introduction to music?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a very Catholic school, and we spent, I'm going to say, we went to church almost every day, and the big part of that was being in the kind of music group and singing at church. We played recorder a lot, which is also still one of my favourite main instruments, and that's kind of what drew me in, I guess, because also church was so boring. The way of kind of making it more interesting and more fun was the musical side of it. And yeah, I was just really into, we were very lucky at my church. It was a very multicultural church. So we would have services that were purely run by the Samoan community. once every month, I think. And that was my favorite time to go to church, because this was like this huge, like vibrant, amazing kind of colorful community of like everybody's outfits were amazing, and the music that they were singing, like the whole church would be singing in 6-part harmony, and it was just, it added this kind of layer to these songs and this music that I was like, wow, people singing in harmony with each other this is it. This is it, you know. This is the true essence of what I love about music. So I was very lucky to come across that very early on, and from there, I just loved harmonizing with everything. Like I would always, me and my sister would walk to school and harmonize with one another. And I just remember a lot of the time, like hearing songs, listening to songs on the radio, and I would never sing the main tune. I would always sing like the backing vocals tunes or the melodies. And I also think another thing that really I've only noticed now looking back is that I never really listened to the words of songs. Like I never heard the lyrics. Also, I think probably because growing up in church, some bit of me was trying to block out what the lyrics were, because they probably were quite outrageous. But I don't know if it's something to do with something cognitive like that, but also mixed with the fact that I just hear sounds a lot of the time. So I think also, you know, being part of that, going to those Samoan church services and not really understanding what the words meant, but really feeling the energy of what was being sung. And also hearing songs on the radio, and also I would always know the melodies and know the harmonies, but I could never remember the lyrics. So there was a lot of funny, like fake lyricking along to like old classic tunes, which was always so. And now I look at the lyrics, I'm like, oh, that's what that says. It's not "Don't go chasing waterfalls." It's "Don't go chasing waterfalls."
Yeah, I was going to say you've got these classic misheardoids. I was going to say from the Disney things that you were singing on your way to school, were there several where you were singing getting the lyrics completely wrong? Yeah,
definitely. Because some of those lyrics of those Disney princesses are probably good that they weren't embedding themselves into my psyche as well. Anyway, so.
And it's interesting that not paying attention to the lyrics, because there's, myself included, but there's quite a few people that I've talked to on the podcast, and it's always for them the focus is on the sonics and the sonic texture, and I think similarly for bands, like quite often it was never really about the lyrics. And then in latter life, once I started writing lyrics, I started to then focus on them. But I think maybe there's a part of the brain that just in certain people where it is just about the sonics and the subject matter, and the words don't matter so much.
Yeah, I think so too.
So from strolling to school and singing the wrong lyrics to Disney songs, obviously you're in a position now where you've got NYX and it's this collaborative. Were there different iterations of bands and things that you were involved with before that?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in kind of opera and musical theatre choruses. So that was my first kind of collective. You definitely wouldn't call that a band. It was geeky. It was the geekiest thing you could possibly do, but I loved it. Such a little theatre kid. So that was my first kind of form of like making music with other people. And then I was at uni and I was studying like classical performance singing, a singing degree. And then my voice totally just went. And kind of looking back on that now, I realize it's just because I was trying to force myself into kind of like a little musical hole that I didn't really fit into. So I lost my voice through that, and then I kind of lost my passion for singing a little bit, but still forced my way through the degree. And then coming out of that, I auditioned for the opera chorus that I'd been a child performer in. So it was kind of like it was a sure like a shoo-in, like I thought I was definitely going to get in, and I didn't get in. As an adult, and that really hit me super hard, and that kind of happened at the same time as I was thinking to move over from New Zealand to the UK. And then I came to the UK, and then I kind of felt this like absolute relief at being a little bit anonymous, because New Zealand is such a magical place to grow up in, but in terms, especially in the musical world, it's very small, and it's hard to kind of reinvent yourself completely. So I was lucky to move over and be able to kind of reassess what I what I loved. And I think I was singing in all these opera choruses and choirs and stuff because I loved the essence of collective choral sound and being like in the middle of like a massive group of people singing. Like there's just nothing like that experience. And I think I loved that, but I didn't love... No, that's not true. I did love the repertoire we would sing, but it wasn't the music I would be listening to in the meantime, which was a lot more kind of Björk, Radiohead, like Peaches, like just a lot different to what I was singing operatically. And so I joined a group called London Contemporary Voices and immediately, you know, started to do a lot more arranging of kind of alternative pop, contemporary pop, alternative rock kind of stuff, making arrangements of that, and then also singing, then started to sing more as a session singer in other people's bands. So I did some session singing for like Laura Imvola, Imogen Heap, Alt J, Goldie. The Goldie one was super fun. But I was singing at Elbow as well. So I was singing for all of these people. But I think the only actual band, like at one point I was like, I want to be in a band. And I started like a kind of shoegazy dream poppy thing with some people that I just met on the internet. And that was fun for a while, but it also didn't give me that hit of like, oh, I just want to be in a big group of people singing and making big hefty sound with the voice. So that's what led me to that. So it was more less bands and more kind of like choral evolution.
Yeah. And sometimes the tendency is obviously when you set up a band, you bring people in, but it feels very much like NYX is a collaborative. It feels like you're the sort of guiding force behind it, but it's very much about bringing people in and that sort of collaboration. Presumably that was a conscious choice rather than just setting up a sort of choir or a group that you're the leader of. Absolutely.
I mean, when I first started it came from wanting to be in a group, like run a group of singers. It came from I'd been doing a lot more kind of going to sound baths and immersive kind of sound experiences. And I'd also been starting to kind of produce my own music and getting really obsessed with chucking my voice through loads of effects. And I was like, what if I combined all of these elements and created something that was like a fusion of all of these things? And when I first started it was more just like, who's with me? Trying to convince my friends to come round, cooking them all dinner. I had a group of singing friends that wanted to join in, and then there was a couple of people who had never sung before but were very interested and played in more kind of alternative bands and liked putting their voice through, and a little bit more technical and knew more about guitar pedals and processing. So it was a real mishmash of people to begin with, and it really felt like I was really trying to get people to join in. And then Philippa came along and helped me kind of define what it was, and then we started calling it NYX, and then we started this amazing series where we collaborated with all these kind of individual amazing female and gender non-conforming kind of electronic artists. And we did a series of collaborative performances with them across London. And that was kind of how it began. It was very collaboratively with other artists, but also with this group of people, which was incredibly DIY. Like, I cannot even express to you. We were turning up to rehearsal rooms. None of us knew how to turn a mixing desk on. None of us knew what cables we needed. We were all like making all these sounds, and sometimes it would be really beautiful, but most of the time it was just pure chaos. And like, you'd be like, what's that? What is that frequency? What's that sound? And none of us would know. And there'd be like a loop running, and we'd be like, oh God, what's going on? And so it was hectic to begin with, and really fun and really experimental. And those early days, and the people that were in it at the very start, it was very much like we were all just trying to figure it out together. And I was definitely leading it, but it felt like everybody was really having to do their own personal practice in order to kind of figure out what their sound amongst this beautiful emerging chaos was.
Well, and it's interesting because obviously NYX, the goddess, talking about birthing day and night from chaos, it almost feels like this was the antidote to perhaps the slightly more formalised approach that you'd had at university, where you were falling out of love with singing. It was like, okay, let's go back to what this is truly about for me, which is being with people, experimenting and having those layers and the chaos. Totally.
And I think also the thing that with NYX, that name especially, I mean, it keeps meaning different things to me every year, which I love. I think like it always means something different to me whenever I kind of reflect on it. But at that time, it was also having come from this kind of session singing, session world kind of I was also singing a little bit with various choirs and film soundtracks, actually, like you know, like proper film choir sound, and like a lot of that session singing for bands and stuff as well. It was a very specific sound that they wanted, particularly the female voices, to produce. And a lot of the time it's like holding a pure note for like a pure high A for like 17 bars, and you're like, oh, surely there's more to this than this. And I think, yeah, it was how I had to look on stage. We had to be very kind of, you know, you'd always have to have your black sparkly outfit on and be standing really still in a way that the rest of the choir were, or it just felt very restrictive. But particularly I just became more and more like the way that women are used in this is like we're just trying to replicate these ancient kind of ways of like little boys singing, and I just was being like, oh God. And then having this absolute flip on the other side of like listening to amazing vocal artists who were using their voice in incredibly different ways, and was like, surely there's a way of integrating all of this. And so I think with NYX, what's interesting is that she's born from chaos. So she's like, you know, she's often associated with being this kind of night creature and slightly satanic or demonic even looking, you know, but in a sexy way. If you look her up on Google, you're going to get sexy dark witch. But
a lot of those Greek goddesses weren't they?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the first Google image search is not going to be great. But I think what's interesting about her is she's kind of, yes, she's born from chaos, but she's also giving birth to light and daytime. And I think what I really wanted to explore with this project is like, how can we really delve into the whole spectrum of the voice and the whole spectrum of emotion? And, you know, in the early days, it was particularly about all of these bits of the voice that had been told they weren't likable. So a lot of the time we were doing a lot more kind of screaming and growling to begin with, and there was a lot more kind of emphasis on the harsher elements and kind of freeing those out. But then we did that collaborative album with Gazelle Twin, which was amazing. And then we did the some of the vocal arrangements and performances on Diablo, the Diablo 4, the computer game. And then I slowly started being like, oh no, now we're just being typecast as these mad witches. Whereas there's just so much breadth of beauty and softness and tenderness and connection and love also in this group, and in the way that we're using our voices and in the way that I compose. And I just really wanted it to be able to be everything, because it is very boring just being typecast as either a witch or an angel. You know, you're a sinner or a saint, and I think we all have the capacity to embody everything everywhere all at once all of the time. And so that's what a lot of the NYX music is. And I think with the NYX album really shows off a lot more of our beautiful tender side, and I think the joy of the Dope Girls soundtrack as it goes, it definitely makes me dance around in the darkness a lot as well. So it feels like both of those things coming out randomly at the same time. We didn't plan for those things to come out at the same time, but they're coming out 1 month after each other. And yeah, I think in terms of showing the full spectrum of night and day, they go there. They go to all the spaces on the edges of the peripheries of everything, and it goes to everywhere in between. So yeah, NYX, she's a good name actually in terms of what this project is.
Under the Skin. So yeah, Dope Girl's sort of debut TV score, which was, from that little girl wandering down the street, loving and singing along to TV and film music. This feels like a pretty special moment. How did this come about then?
Oh, so many magical kind of ways this came about. I think so. Shannon Murphy, the director, she works with Imogen Knight, who is an amazing embodiment director and kind of intimacy coordinator and somatic experiencing therapist that we work with and have worked with since almost the start of NYX. So she's been very much a core part of our creative and
Do you work with her in a musical capacity?
Yeah, we work with her in a musical capacity and have done since the start. So I mean, we can get more deeply. There's so many layers of this, but Imogen's been a core part of our evolution because it's really, another one of our aims was absolutely to bring back to kind of make sure that all of our sounds are coming from the body and from a very authentic place. And every time we're kind of performing, recording, embodying, we're all there, we're all warming up together. We Imogen is with us in the recording room a lot of the time. We're really it's really important to us, this type of practice. And I think it comes across really, really, really deeply through the sound, how human and how embodied and how kind of authentic the sounds of everyone's voices are. So anyway, she also works for film and television, and she takes private clients and stuff as well. But she was working as the embodiment director on Dope Girls, and I think as you'll see when it comes out, there's a lot of incredible dancing scenes. There's some incredible kind of psychedelic scenes, and so she was using NYX music in the room whilst it was being recorded. So a lot of the time, a lot of the dance scenes, a lot of the really beautiful kind of intimacy scenes had NYX music playing in the background. So I think Shannon, as that was being recorded, was like, this could be a really cool route to go down. And then she came and she saw us perform. NYX also we perform in a load of different kind of arrangements, but there's a version of the show that's just myself and Alicia Jane Turner, who's an amazing string player and amazing composer themselves. And we have a version of our next show that's just the two of us, and we performed it at the Barbican opening for Matthew Herbert like a couple of years. I can't remember what it was, but Shannon saw that show and then kind of, I think from there, I think she was just really pushing for us to have that job. And it was very confusing. We were obviously incredibly excited. We were like, this sounds amazing. We saw the absolutely phenomenal kind of pitch deck that had been set up by I don't even know what her name would be, but she's like the kind of creative art director of it. And just the aesthetic and the concept just seems so amazing and so aligned with our kind of ethos as well, that it just seemed like, oh, this is so good. And then, but obviously we'd never done a TV series, and before that, the only things I'd composed for in terms of screen stuff had also been like short films and actually, no, that's not true. I had done a longer documentary film, a couple of documentary films as well, but nothing to that scale. So it was one of those things of like, I knew I could do it. All the people around me knew I could do it. Shannon knew I could do it. But I think, and I don't know what the conversations were. No one's ever going to know what those big executive producer conversations are, but it felt from the outside as if everyone was like, oh, is this a good idea, getting these people on that have never done anything like this? And I'm really, really glad that Shannon's incredibly inspirational at like deciding what she wants and not putting up with any shit until she gets it. You know, she's really, I think she's had to really, like, I think being a woman in that industry, especially as a director, is, you know, you got to really, really fight for your right to party. So she did really, really, really good job for us getting us on there. And I think, you know, there was always that fear that handing in that first episode, first draft, but I handed it in, and then a couple of hours later I got a call from Shannon and Stephen and Roseanne, who were the original kind of editing team, and they were like, this is the best first pass of music we have ever heard. This is amazing. You absolutely fucking nailed it. And I thought, I don't even care if you're just trying to encourage me. That's great feedback, and I'm so happy, and I'll take it. So yeah, it was a really cool relationship, and Shannon's team that she had at the beginning, the editing team, were really cool, really supportive. They were using NYX music as temp music anyway throughout, so it just made sense. It really fits the show, and I'm really happy we managed to get in, despite who knows what kind of hurdles were going on back behind the scenes, but I can only imagine.
Okay, amazing. So Shannon obviously pushed through getting you guys on board. So talk us through the process. Because obviously the slight difference here is that you've got a brief. But obviously what's great is that because they've been temping everything with your music anyway, they want your sound. But how does that creative process differ from, say, sitting down to do an album, and what was the brief, and what was your starting point?
So this is what's good about this is that I actually only really work to brief. Like, I really, really struggle sitting down with no parameters and I tried to sit down probably like 4 years ago, and I'm like, right, I'm going to write a NYX album. And honestly, it was one of the worst, most depressing creative couple of months I've ever had. I was just really blocked. I was really, it just isn't that kind of open parameter, well, not even parameter, just that open space of like, okay, you know, we're going to make this. I don't work well with that. And I'm not a person that goes to the studio every day and sits down and makes loads of music and then puts out some every now and then. Like, I have to have a context to make something in, and then I can just roam free. So, I mean, even the NYX album, which we can talk about later, you know, like I had to write that as a live performance, as like a show first, and then go backwards from there. So I really, or I have to have really specific themes, or really kind of like a story. So for me, this was almost like
this played into your hands,
an ideal situation. I mean, you know, the thing with TV is that, you know, you get a brief, and then that brief keeps constantly evolving underneath your feet as you're going. And there was a lot of things that changed as I was working through. But I think that first, I like even sitting in the spotting sessions with the directors, with the producers and the editors, as I did, there was something in me that could always just hear, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to do here. And then I would explain that to whoever was in the room, sometimes the producer, sometimes the director, and be like, I'm going to do this. And they were like, that's exactly what I was thinking as well. And so there was almost, I'm going to say there were hardly any discrepancies in that. Like I just feel like I had a really natural kind of knack and a sense for what was going to be appropriate where. And yes, a lot of that was based on the temp music, because sometimes I would hear the temp music and I'd be like, oh no, I think it shouldn't be like that. But I would kind of be like, okay, I'll start off with that, but I think it should go in this direction or whatever. So I think that first episode was really hard, because it was mainly hard on it was hard because for loads of different production reasons, everything was really crazy. There was a lot of people shifting in and out. There was a lot of I'm going to say I probably had 8 re-edits. So that was really confusing and really, but people really like, the music's great, it's just the picture kept changing. So and the story kept changing that they were editing it to. So then I was like, okay, that music's no longer appropriate there because it's not leading into this and leading into this. So that first block was really hard, because then I was also dealing with the most difficult thing, which is just your own sense of like, am I doing this right? Is this too hard for me? Like, what am I good enough at this? La 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 la, which is definitely the biggest barrier of any creative process ever. But so getting that first episode over the line was was huge. And then once that had been done, and then you hand the music in and you're like, great, this is all done. And then you watch the mix, the pass that they've done, and you're like, oh, you can't even hear the music there. You can't even, and so then begins the fight of like, can you please turn the music up there? And can you please, like, if I'd known it was going to be that quiet, I would have composed something completely different. Like, that doesn't fit there. And, we were also dealing with a lot of the time, there was, as I'm sure there is in everything, like rapidly changing budgets for source music. So a lot of the time they'd be like, which ended up being something really fun for me, but a lot of the time they'd be like, crap, we haven't been able to get that piece of temp music in time. Can you just knock something out really quickly? And I'd be like, let's not make a habit of this, but yes, I'll write a cool little like psychedelic rock interlude for this. Like, fuck yeah. So in some ways it was kind of those little bits where things went wrong in some part of the chain were actually quite fun, because it meant that I got to create an original soundtrack that's really, really vast. Like, it runs through so many different genres, and you can almost hear what it was meant to be temp music, but I've chucked it, source music, and I've chucked something else in. So, but it was, that first one getting over the line was intense, and then then they got easier and easier and faster, and by the end of it I was managing to kind of get through them quite quickly and quite and then also the team gets used to one another, you get used to the producer, you kind of almost you're working on like an osmosis basis. You're like, I think that's there and there and there and there, without actually even communicating. So the team that I was working with were awesome, and my music editor, Poppy, was fucking awesome, and my score mixer, Ed Hamilton, was so amazing, and he was also like my biggest cheerleader. So, and I'd actually worked with him before NYX in that original series that we did back in like 2018. So it was really magical working with him again, and good people helped. No, we worked with him, like he has a project called Deadlight with his partner Anna, and we collaborated with them when we first started NYX, when we did that collaborative series with all of these electronic musicians back in 2018. Alicia Jane Turner, who's a massive part of NYX now, and Dope Girls especially as well, they were teamed up with Deadlight, who was Ed and Anna, and we did a concert with them at the Old Church in Stoke Newington, which was so amazing. That was one of the best, my favourite gigs of my whole life. So it was amazing to re-collaborate with Ed and work with him again on this.
And he was mixing your cues?
Yes, he was.
The demos that you were sending through, was that pre-mix? Were you waiting for sign-off before you had him mix them, or were you getting him to mix them and then?
Yeah, I was doing the majority of the mixing myself, and he would clean them up once they were getting ready to be put in the proper audio mix by Poppy. So yeah, I was getting things probably almost to, my process was like, make all the music on my own. So I was playing all the instruments, singing all the voices. I think that's also why I was totally losing the plot, because I was like singing like 30 different voices in my head out loud, pretending to be 1,000 different people. And then once the music had been relatively signed off, I'd send that out to my other singers, get them to record their bits, lay that back on, do a little bit more editing, chopping and changing. Then I'd send them off to Ed. Ed would mix them up. Then Poppy would lay them, and then Poppy would sit in the mix and fight for our right to be heard above all the other people trying to get their way.
And what you were saying before as well is the with Dope Girls and the new album coming out. The new album is possibly the sort of the lighter side of Duality, and the Dope Girls soundtrack is the sort of darker side of Duality. There's a lot of, obviously I've had the honour of being able to have a listen through to it, but there's definitely a sense of a lot of kind of distorted, crunchy vocals as well. Can you give us a brief synopsis of what Dope Girls is? Because I'm just suddenly dawned on me that we don't know tell us a little bit about the story of Dope Girls.
I mean, good question. It's basically the story of these incredible kind of interrelated women, and it's set, the very first episode is set kind of armistice day, like end of World War One, and it's all very much like centered around Soho in London. And then there's just kind of this social kind of chaos happening at the end of the war. A lot of the men have not come back yet, or they've died, and then there's kind of all these strange pockets of the world that are being filled up by women, and it's basically like a really cool underground, sexy drug and alcohol and sex and party and family, and some of the women are kind of running go underground and start running a club, and then some of the other women are kind of the other way and becoming the first police woman, and so it's kind of the clash between that liberal and conservative energy throughout. And it's just really, it's really funny, and it's really there's a lot of humor. It's very dark and violent at points. It's very like, there's a really beautiful kind of family story that runs throughout. So it does have all of these spectrums of what the sound is as well, which is really great. And also because of it, it's also really, I mean, I can't even express to you how beautiful it is. Like the art direction and the just the sets and the costumes and
production design.
Yeah, the production design. That's there we go. I'm getting there with the lingo. It's just so gorgeous, and so kind of just really, it's just got such a strong aesthetic. And I think the other thing that I found really fun with it, because there is a lot of fun in it, is that I kind of had the capacity to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek and quite silly with a lot of the music, which is also not something I would usually do with NYX music. So having the context of being able to make, like, put in sounds and put in elements of, especially the rhythm. Like I've used a lot of kind of really funny, well, not funny, but like really kind of classic breakbeaty drum and bassy stuff throughout, which I think is not something that I would have ever done outside of this context.
Is that harking back to your days working with Goldie?
I think so. And also it weirdly makes it feel, because it's this is really strange, distorted kind of Britannia theme that runs throughout it as well, which is kind of, is taking the piss. And it's also, it feels, nothing to me feels more like British than dropping a breakbeat over some really funny like vocals. So I think it's got this really weird kind of, and it's not trying to be perfectly period piece. I'm sure there's going to be 1,000 people that are like, this is not what people said, or not what people did, and, la, la, la. But it's not trying to be.
It's a stylized.
No, it's a stylized thing. And and there's some incredible performances from people in it as well. There's like the dancing as well is such a beautiful part of it. Like this girl, Umi Myers, she plays one of the characters, and there's so many amazing dance scenes with her, and it was such a pleasure to be able to score. I mean, it was bloody difficult because obviously what they shoot is not in tempo, so you're trying to make these like dance music tracks underneath someone where it's cut and it's not moving in the exact same rhythm, but it was a fun challenge.
Yeah. Why don't they do? Why it always seems crazy that they don't just sort of literally just get even just a kick drum going at a certain speed, so that it would make editing it easier, and then it certainly makes scoring it easier.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? And then sometimes there were elements of like, someone might be tap dancing on stage, and so that absolutely has to be, and the other thing was like people forgot to get the or I don't know what happened, but they were like, we only had mime contracts for the people on stage. So there's a lot of like musicians on stage a lot of the time whose sound, whose actual sound we can't use. So I had to replicate, like I'd have to sit, and like a lot of the time I would kind of like take their raw audio file from the recording and then have to like convert that to MIDI and then like figure out what sounds could go where. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to replicate the sound of this person actually plucking the double bass. So I'm just going to turn it into like someone like playing like a deep bass drum or someone like singing it. So it looks awesome actually when you can see the movement happening at the same time. But in terms of writing a song that feels like it's flowing or adhering to some kind of specific tempo, it was pretty intense.
Does that mean that that piece of music then, does that end up being incredibly dynamic as you're trying to fit that to the scene, or have you managed to sort of be clever with the edit and the way it works?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time what I would do is the rhythm most of the time comes from my voice. So I'm doing a lot of like kind of vocal percussion, which makes me sound like I'm doing beatboxy stuff. I'm not. Please, listeners, don't think that I'm beatboxing. But there are different vocal percussion. I call it whisper percussion actually on my stems. Is always what I call it. But I've used a lot of that to lay a tempo down and lay a beat, and it means because the voice making percussion is slightly more fluid, you could stretch the tempo slightly without it sounding too out of beat. Because as soon as you stick any kind of, I don't know, like snares and hi-hats and toms and kicks in, your body needs to have some kind of secure attachment to a tempo. So I think having the voice as the foundation of the tempo means there was a lot more kind of embodied freedom of stretching it and pulling it back a little bit more. But I have managed to integrate, and then there'd be moments where I could integrate like electronic production back into that as well. So it was tough, and it was like, oh God, if you could just move this little piece of picture a couple of seconds to the left, it would really help. But yeah, it was really fascinating. And then there's another amazing scene. Where someone's singing a lullaby in the bath, and what I loved was hearing kind of musical sounds on the screen, and then being like, how can I underscore this, or how can I make it sound like that person's actually sung this over something? So that was really fun as well. It was like, okay, she's kind of singing a little bit of a lullaby here. Like, how can I make something? Yeah, how can I put like chords and bass and stuff under this that makes it sound like she was always intending to sing over the score? It was really fun. And then also taking sounds on the screen, like people clapping or people running, and then turning that into the rhythm that would then follow on into the next scene. So I found that I really enjoyed doing stuff like that.
And just to pick up on something you mentioned there about whisper percussion, I noticed one of the other cues that springs to mind was "Let No Man Steal" brackets your time, spelt THYME. Is this sort of punnery something that you do with your cue, the names of your cues?
Definitely. I loved doing that, and I'm really glad you noticed that, because I was like, only certain people will pay attention to this.
There's only the editor, really, but I quite often do the same. I think, like, let's make this a little bit. Let's
make this silly. Yeah. So that one particularly is based on the traditional song "Steal Your Time." So. But I think in this context, because it's quite like I'm going to say the male characters in this program are not very inspirational. A lot of them, they're really like, you get angry. You get very angry at a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of the male characters on the show are absolutely excruciating. And one of the characters has like a really intense situation with one of them, and then this song kind of comes in. So instead of having, and then the lyrics are "Let no man steal your time." So I wanted to focus more on the "Let no man," and then in brackets "Steal your time."
So is that a traditional folk song then?
Yeah, it is.
It's interesting because I think it was that cue when I was listening to it. It reminded me a little bit of the Unthanks, because they quite often do covers of like northeastern folk music, and there was something about that. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I love doing arrangements, and I think it's almost my favorite thing to do, is like making arrangements of various songs. So I was looking, I had to do a lot of research into songs that were in the public domain that could be used, because we didn't have enough budget to be getting the rights for anything. So hopefully if it does do another round and we've got bigger budgets to do bigger covers, it would be great. But I just had to use some pretty old songs. I've also done one of Pack Up Your Troubles, like the old kind of wartime song as well, in the middle of that my friend Laura sings. But yeah, Let No Man Steal Your Time, that's a really kind of classic. There's loads of different versions of it. I think like this, and it's been used in films and stuff before as well. Like if you look up Steal Your Time on any kind of digital streaming platform, there's a thousand different versions of it. So I'm excited for this version to hit the world too.
Well, it is pretty annoying when people steal your herbs.
Yeah, innit?
Just sing about it.
Exactly.
Amazing. So so we've got Dope Girls on that side, which is the dark, and then in contrast to that, coming out, is it the 25th of March?
28th of March.
28th of March. We've got the debut album titled NYX. Now, something you mentioned earlier, which I want to go back to, was the idea that you basically need a brief. So for the album, you created a brief in the form of like, okay, this is a stage show, and then sort of reverse engineer it back from that. Yeah,
that is. I mean, the good thing about this NYX album is it's like our first. We've been working together for almost 7 years, just up on 7 years, and we've done 1,000 different performances. We've been a million different configurations. We've collaborated with so many people. We've done so many kind of, both musical and with various kind of installation artists and film artists. And there's been so many different pieces of music created for different contexts, but we've never ever put out our own music. So luckily we already had quite a lot of stuff that had come through from various different live projects. So I was drawing on a lot of that. So there's a lot of songs in there that we actually were performing 6 or 7 years ago, that have evolved into they, and they always do. Like I try and make sure our live set is the same for ease of for everyone's ease, but I can't help it. Every single time we have to kind of evolve it in some way that it shifts on and also matches the people that are performing in it. But so there was that. And I think once I had these kind of moments plotted out, these kind of peak moments of the album plotted out, then I could kind of see, right, as I'm kind of moving through this journey, and a lot of this is done with my partner Philippa Niels, who's the kind of creative producer and like the kind of mastermind behind all of the ways that NYX works kind of outside of the musical realm, but she's also a very incredible kind of theatre and experience like designer. And she, would work with her a lot, very visually, would sit and would plot out like what the journey is of the show and then how would that translate into the album. And so we set, like for us sitting and thinking about the order of things and how people would listen to this and how people would experience this was massive. And then I can kind of see, once all these parts of the journey are plotted out, okay, there's a space here and we need some, it's been very hefty and very dense in the sound. And so what would happen if we just pulled everything out and it was just a solo voice and a violin like calling at each other across a valley, and then so play around with that. And then what would it be like to do something actually more traditional choral and have everybody singing words, and have and what would that be like? So making a piece that's like that. And then we brought back the other amazing things that we brought back this track from this collaboration that I did with Alicia Jane Turner and Ed and Anna and Deadlight in our very first series. And AJ, my God, AJ was also a massive part of Dope Girls because I was sending them a lot of, they did all the string arrangements. They were also playing a lot of like synth lines, and they're like a master of noise and drone and that kind of magic. So they would send me a lot of stuff that I could use in my palette of mixing and producing. But they have this piece that I kind of helped evolve with them. That's in the album as well, called Undercurrent. And so we put that in, and then that makes, that gets really, really big and really, really vast. And then what happens when you drop down, like, where do you go next? So I think for us, it's like really, really about a huge experience of this whole spectrum, and having the format of thinking about an album as a journey is really helpful for me, because I can't function and it also made things like choosing a single to put out, or it feels kind of not almost not my vibe, because it's like the album to me makes sense as like a whole thing, and it's really hard for me to pull out individual tracks and for them to make sense without being part of the journey. But I think that's my own shit, as well. I think they do. I think we put out a song last week and people are really resonating with that. It's just for myself, I find that the whole album is really like one big entity. So it's hard for me to think in like singles or tracks or whatever. So
I suppose if that's how you've conceived it, and it's very much about that journey, it is quite difficult to pick out any, and particularly is difficult as well because obviously today people generally do go to an album and cherry pick rather than perhaps 20 years ago would buy an album and it is about that journey. But
yeah, I mean, I think the individual tracks, individual songs working as standalone entities actually is totally appropriate for this album. I think it's more just like when I'm composing, I can't be like, okay, now I'm going to write a track like this and a track like this. It has to make sense as a whole. So, and I, the nature of music now is that people just, they'll come across something on a playlist, or they'll be listening to something in the background. And I've got to say, I don't know if this is very backgroundy music, just because the waves of each song are massive. So what might start off as something really kind of soft and tender might just grow into a huge, huge wail. And I think if someone's got it on the background, it might be like, whoa, what's going on? But
where do you find inspiration?
I mean, I think as I mentioned before, like having a brief for something, having the parameters of this is what I'm going to channel out. Just because I think if you've got this whole, like my palette of sound is massive out of my voice, and if it's not directed with some kind of intention, it just could go anywhere. So I think for me, having a brief, but a brief for me doesn't always mean like someone being like, I would like this piece of music that's 30 minutes long and did it. It's more like, what's the essence of this? Like how, and I really encourage when I'm working for myself or working for other people, just having as much kind of visual, poetic kind of information. So I love having videos or images or words, phrases that inspire something, that trips something over. And that's usually what I need in order to start making music for something. And then in terms of outside of being in a studio, I'd say it's pretty classic, but I would say like being in nature is probably the biggest one. I mean, yeah, just nature, cosmos, psychedelic universe, like all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I worked for a while in a psychedelic retreat, which was an incredibly expansive kind of world and helped me and really, really kind of opened up my understanding of what my voice could do and what music could be. And I think I don't work there anymore, and I have kind of taken a break from that kind of stuff. But I think it opened up enough for me to realize that honestly, the voice is infinite what it can do, especially when you combine it with electronics. It's like there is no stopping what you can do in terms of sound, and that's only going to kind of expand even further as the technology gets more and more expensive and clever. And the thing about that is, I also think it's a really beautiful kind of relationship between human and machine, because the way in which people's voices respond to effects is so unique. And I don't think like every single one of my singers is like using different pieces of kit, and everyone sounds totally different running through them. And that's what inspires me, I think, a lot as well, is the way that different vocal timbres can interact with effects. I just find it so... A lot of the time when I'm writing music, the first thing I'll do is find an amazing effect that's a fun new kind of toy for me, and then I'll work the composition around that. Or I'll find these kind of like loops of sound. And that's initially also why we were called an electronic drone choir, is because the drone was the foundation and the center and the grounding point for everything. But the drone could have been like a synth drone, it could have been a loop, it could have been a breath running over and over again, but it's some kind of like solid foundation for things to grow out from. So I think drones in general, or loops, or some kind of sonic footing is also a strong inspiration for me to build upon.
Getting a taste. Are there any sort of particular albums or songs that you remember that when you heard them, it was a seminal moment where you think, oh, hang on, and that has sort of fed directly into what you're doing today?
Yeah, I think the one, God, where do we begin here? I think Björk's Vespertine was like a huge one for me. And Björk in general is like, obviously she's just something else. She's really embodied and really channeled so much of what it means to be a human being on this planet, and she's really expressing a lot she's expressing like stuff from the earth, stuff from the cosmos, stuff from her own body, stuff about being a woman, stuff, all this comes directly through her and her compositions. And so I think as a compositional vocal lyrical genius that she is, that album was really, really, I mean, all of Björk's albums, I mean, in terms of production, Volta is like my favorite, but in terms of something that I go back to, I think Vespertine is probably my number one. And it
sounds like it feels like there's a real spiritual side to you in terms of just generally the universe and your outlook on life. When you would go back to listening to that Björk album as a child, were you aware of those elements then, or is that something that's come subsequently? I
think I probably didn't really even know about Björk until I was in my late teens, I'd say. Like I was probably still in like a musical theatre Disney zone until I was probably like teenager. I mean, I think also, growing up with choral and operatic music, there were moments where I'd be like, wow, like a chord that would be so deeply dissonant and then something resolved was like a huge thing for me. Like I loved that. Or really strange chord structures I would always love, with voices all topped on top of each other. So I think when I first started listening to this kind of music, stuff like Björk, I think it was the way in which the production had been crafted. And now I look back at it, it's like, wow, these worlds are so unique, and so that there's such a deep connection between something that feels really organic, but also like there was just no border between the organic and the synthetic. Like it just, the way that she's using, and the way, the collaboration she was doing with various producers on those albums, it's just like the way in which people were playing synthesizers like they were real humans, and it's so, I mean, you know, she's done albums, which has done that album that was Medulla, that was just voice, and that's just one version of it. But I feel like a lot of her instrumentation is just so speaking from the cosmos, you know, like all of these magical little glittery firefly sounds and these deep, like throbbing bass noises, and then she'll go real deep into some hardcore techno, and then it will be like, oh, this vast choral expansive magic. And I just think it's the vastness of what's possible from a kind of sound design production element that I was just like, wow, that in combination with just her the expanse of her voice, I think that was probably what hit me.
It's funny, isn't it, how sometimes something touches you and it's quite hard to articulate what it is. I think that goes back to, again, sort of the sonic textures. It's quite hard to intellectualize, okay, well, why is that having... I have it with visual art as well. I know what I like, but I can't really pinpoint why I like that, and I'm less interested in that. It's just a feeling in a moment. Yeah, I'm glad I can make music because I absolutely can't intellectualize over it. So that's why doing podcasts and stuff is funny, because I'm like, blah, 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 blah. But I think it touches, I think it touches on what I love about it. It's everything. It's all of it, but particularly the sound design production and how much of a borderless nature there is between the organic and the synthetic, I think is magical. Yeah.
Any other albums that stand out or songs?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Where do I start? I think I always loved Dead Can Dance and Lisa Gerrard as well. When I first came around to finding that was a bit of a revelation. Again, because it's just so outrageously kind of cinematic and influenced by so many different types of music from all over the world, and feels deeply spiritual and deeply spiritual music in a way that's not afraid to like go to the depths of what needs to be released. It's quite full of grief, a lot of the Dead Can Dance music that I love. Similarly, kind of Cocktail Twins, that kind of realm of really incredible floating shoegazy, dream poppy vocals always blew my mind. I always loved all of the Sia Ross albums. Really, the early ones really, really kind of expanded out what that world could be, and similarly, kind of the post-rock world of the Explosions in the Sky and Mono and all of that stuff that was just, to me, feels like incredibly, I mean, cinematic, I always use that word as like a descriptive word, but it just means like absolutely vast and intense and like over the top and really transportive, like, so that all of those realms really, I think, and actually, to be honest, it's not, a lot of the time it's not even specific albums, it's just that style of creating and being it. I think also with a lot of those artists, it's like listening is one thing and then going to their shows and being at like a festival performance of these incredible artists, and it's mixed with all the lights and all the people and all the acoustics, and like your body is vibrating with it. Like that to me is also really important.
And what about visual media? You mentioned Gladiator.
Oh yeah.
But are there sort of TV series, movies that, again, you think when you saw them, you're like, oh.
I mean, yeah, it's so basic, bitch, but like Gladiator and Dune and like all of these, like absolutely like, you know, like.
So there's the Hans Zimmer's.
God, I know, I hate it. I hate that I love it, but I fucking love it, you know? Like, it's just.
He's defined modern film score for us, I think. Really.
Yeah, and how much of it is actually him doing it anyway, so. But yeah, I think for me, like, do you know what I used to laugh at so much? One of my favourite parts of going to the movies, and I hate that they don't do this anymore, was like when I used to go to View Cinemas, and they used to have that thing at the very beginning, which was like all of these incredibly deep ASMR bits where it's like the cola was pouring in the cup, and then the seat was being zipped up, and then there'd be this moment where all the little silver balls would fall into the Dolby audio thing, and it would be like, and it was like this big sub bass drop. And I think that's my favorite sound. And I've been trying to emulate that my whole life, is from that experience of like that cinema experience. And I hate that they've taken that off. Like, they don't do that anymore, and they need to bring it back. But I think people using audio in that way, I mean, in the same way when you go and experience, you know, movies like Inception and all the kind of Batman movies and stuff in the cinema. I love going to the cinema and seeing like outrageous blockbusters and hearing all the sound design and all this kind of stuff. I know it's a bit cheesy, but I do love it. And I think, you know, in recent years, scores like Poor Things was really blew my mind. Likewise, I love the joy of listening to the White Lotus soundtrack. You know, there's just so much joy and silliness in that, and the way that he translates that super cute, silly motif around and around again. Like, I just love it, and the way that it can kind of expand out across different iterations and different styles of music as well. I really enjoy. So there's just been there's so many, and likewise, I mean, that the soundtrack for The Substance, I think, is incredible. The ones that I've seen recently, I love it. I'm yet to see Nosferatu, but my collaborator AJ, it's just like they listen to that soundtrack every day. And I think my ultimate heroes of soundtracking are probably Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. That collab to me is also just genius, and I can't get enough of them, especially in a big cinema situation.
Well, Stephen Harron's a big fan of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I think he used a lot of his score to temp his Dark Materials. And going back to White Lotus, so Cristobal Tapia-de-Veer, I interviewed him last year, and there's some fascinating insights into. But the vocal motif from White Lotus was, I think he said he recorded it like 5 or 6 years beforehand. He had a Colombian singer in the studio and then recorded it, and then brought it back for the score and sort of pitched it and played around with it, and that gave birth to this kind of. But yeah, there's something very tribal, and he has this amazing ability to use rhythm to make you feel uneasy.
Yeah, he is an absolute master, that guy. I've just been like kind of researching more and more into, because he's just, you know, he'll do one thing and then the next thing you hear him do is totally different. Like,
well, it's something he talks about is like happy accidents as well. I think probably you're from the similar school of just playing around with something and improvising, and then all of a sudden something happened. It's like, okay, that's where this is the starting point. This is the bit, the little shiny thing, and we're going to build around it. So
yeah.
Similar processes in that respect. Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Some fascinating insights into the debut TV score for Dope Girls, but also kind of how you approach album, balance the sort of the art in its purest sense, but also the TV score. But actually, it feels like they are one and the same in many ways. It's a different sort of element of the same thing. It's all an extension of NYX and what you're about.
Yeah, it's all melted into one big giant thing in my head anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So the only thing left to... I've got my quick fire questions. Well, what's your favourite biscuit or cookie?
Do you know what? I'm definitely more of like a cheese and cracker gal, but I think yesterday, I know, weird, but yesterday I was getting a little bit like hormonal craving, and I went to the off license and I was looking at those little pink wafer biscuits, and I thought, might get one of those.
Yeah.
I can't eat them anymore because I can't eat gluten anymore, but I used to love those as a kid. You go to a kid's party, they always have those little pink vanilla wafers.
Yeah, what are they made of? You know, like, what is that constructed of? I don't want to know. I don't want to look at it.
Best not to know, isn't it? It's like a sausage. It's best not to know what's in it. I've recently been to Australia and had a Tim Tam for the first time.
Oh, I was going to say Tim Tam. If I had to say another one, it would be Tim Tam.
Yeah, they're really good.
Anything that's more chocolate than biscuit is good, you know?
Well, somebody before I'd had one, somebody likened it to a penguin in the UK. Now, I was never a massive penguin fan, but Tim Tam, and apparently you can't get them here, because a friend of mine literally texted me a picture of a packet of Tim Tams the other day that they found in Waitrose. So.
In Waitrose? Oh, yeah. God, Waitrose has got good stuff.
Next question, what's a little-known fact about you?
A little-known fact about me. The first one that is popping into my head is that I was the captain of the Auckland under-14 girls cricket team.
Wow.
I love cricket. I don't know, it's very off-brand, but I fucking love cricket.
Well, I mean, as a Kiwi, it's it's an institution, isn't it? Rugby and cricket.
Yeah, rugby not so much. Rugby's a little bit like, oh, but cricket, I can just sit and watch the cricket all day.
Don't play anymore?
No, I think probably once I was I think then the requirements to be constantly theatre kid was probably took over. But yeah, love cricket. Loved it when I was little.
What scares you?
Sharks. Sharks, so scared of sharks. Yeah, I mean, you're much more likely to get hit by a car, you know, and I'm not scared of that, but I'm terrified of sharks when I'm swimming in the sea.
Well, I was in Sydney over Christmas and I went down to Bondi to do a bit of surfing. It's the first time I've ever surfed in waters where there could be sharks. And I know obviously they've got nets and the chances are absolutely minimal, but there was just in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, could be one. What?
Could be. And every single shadow you see, a lot of the time it's just a cloud in the sky. You're like, definitely a shark. Like, it takes me a lot. I swim, obviously, like when I'm in New Zealand, I'm swimming every day. And I if I'm on my own, I'm not going out over like waist deep. I'm just sticking to that. And then if I am with someone else, I'm making sure they're way further out than I am.
Yeah. Then the shark bait. So go out with a decoy.
Yeah.
And finally, what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, buckle in, baby. Yeah, I mean, probably just all the kind of classic things of yeah, you're just enough just as you are. It's all good.
I think, not feeling enough is a very common facet of the human psyche, isn't it?
I think we've unfortunately all embodied that very deeply. So for someone to come in and just be like, you know what? You're just all good. You're just great just as you are. You don't need to try. Just chill. You're good. Would have been helpful. I'll go back and tell her that.
Beautiful. And a lovely sentiment to end on. So, thanks again for taking time to chat. It's been lovely. Where can people find you? Or socials, websites, etc., etc.?
Yeah, we've got if you follow us on Instagram, that's probably the one that we update the most regularly, which is nyx.edc, which is quite weird in a Kiwi accent. nyx.edc is that one. We've also, our website's a good place to go to as well, which is just www.nyx-edc.com. And you can find us on all the digital streaming platforms as well. I think just look up NYX, NYX, and you should be able to find us. Daughters is the single we've just put out, and by the time this goes to air, there'll be another couple on there, and hopefully the OST will be out too, and taking over.
Yeah, well, you'll be on the BBC as well.
We'll be on the Beeb. Yeah, it's going out on BBC.
Again, thanks so much for taking the time to chat, Charlotte.
Thanks so much, Jim. Really nice chatting to you.
Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larkmusic.com. Larkmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larkmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.